She said it in the hallway, between the kitchen and the living room, at my mother's birthday dinner. She said, "He was always mine, Roz. You've known it." She said it without lowering her voice. I looked at my sister's face, the face I had known for 33 years, and thought, I signed something, 2 years into my marriage, that neither she nor Richard has ever heard of, and that Richard forgot the moment after he signed it. I walked back to the table. I ate the cake. I drove home alone and called my attorney. Good day, dear listeners. It's Lena again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. People always say you should never let business into love. I have worked in Oregon family law for 12 years. I have seen what happens when people separate them so completely that they sign away every protection in the belief that love is sufficient. Love is many things. It is not a legal document. Sometimes, if you are careful and patient, the document is what remains when the love has gone somewhere it shouldn't have gone. I am Rosalind Ashby, and I was 37 years old when my marriage ended in a Portland family law attorney's office on a gray Thursday in February. I had worked in that field for 12 years. I had helped draft or review more than 200 marital agreements for clients. I knew what made them enforceable. I knew what language to use and where the weaknesses lived. When my sister said what she said in that hallway, my first instinct was professional. I went home and read the document. Portland in late autumn is the color of the Willamette on a gray day, pewter and green, the rain arriving not in storms but as a permanent low murmur, the air so wet you stop registering it. The city sits with a particular self-possession in that season, as if it has made its peace with the weather and found it workable. I had made my peace with a great many things over 12 years of family law work. I understood that marriages end for reasons that are usually simpler than the people inside them want to admit. I understood the financial architecture of dissolution. I had, 2 years into my own marriage, quietly arranged that architecture for myself. Richard Pemberton and I had married when I was 32. He was a commercial insurance broker, comfortable, socially assured, genuinely charming in the way of people who have always been easy to like. He was also, I came to understand, someone who assumed that practical matters sorted themselves out in favor of the person with the loudest attorney. He had signed our prenuptial agreement at my strong suggestion, on the grounds that, as a family law professional, I believed in the value of documented clarity. He had signed without consulting independent counsel. He had trusted my professional knowledge and had found the process unremarkable, which had suited me fine. 2 years into the marriage, I proposed a postnuptial update. I framed it as responsible estate planning following a financial seminar we had both attended. It was that, in part. It was also something more specific. Richard had been discussing, at the time, the possibility of buying an investment property in his name alone, a commercial space he was evaluating with a business partner. I wanted the marital agreement to address that explicitly. The postnuptial amendment, drafted by my personal family law attorney, Fern Whitaker, and technically available for Richard's independent review, I told him he should engage counsel, and he acknowledged that in writing, contained a clause I had written myself, working from years of professional precedent. Any property purchased during the marriage in one spouse's name only, using that spouse's individual credit and income, would remain that spouse's separate property in the event of dissolution. Richard signed at Fern's office on a Thursday afternoon with a notary and 2 witnesses. He had looked at the signature page, signed, and gone back to a conversation about an unrelated property deal that had been occupying him all week. He did not read the clause. I kept a certified copy in the fireproof document box in my home office. The Selwood bungalow was the center of my life in ways that had nothing to do with Richard. I had planted the kitchen garden from bare soil in our first spring in the house, kale and herbs, and 1 ambitious fig tree that took 3 years to produce anything. Richard considered the garden a hobby. I considered it the thing I would keep regardless of what happened to anything else. I tended it on Saturday mornings while the rain murmured against the greenhouse plastic I had stretched over the raised beds, and I thought about things I was not yet ready to name. The first warning sign was behavioral. In the 18 months before my mother's birthday dinner, Richard had been arriving at family gatherings before I did, on the pretext of helping my mother set up. He and my sister Cora had developed an ease with each other that was careful in my presence and, I understood eventually, considerably less careful when I was not there. I saw it accumulate. I noted it in the small notebook I kept in my desk drawer, with dates and initials, the way I would have noted a discrepancy in a client's file. The second warning was documentary. I had been reviewing our bank statements for tax preparation in early October and found a charge I did not recognize. $3,200 at a Pearl District restaurant on a Tuesday evening when Richard had told me he was at a client dinner. I wrote it down. The date, the amount, the name of the restaurant. I initialed the page, because that is what 12 years of family law practice teaches you to do. My mother's birthday was a Thursday evening in Lake Oswego, the kind of house where difficult things are said in hallways and then pretended not to have been said at the dinner table. 40 people, the house warm and smelling of good food. Cora had arrived before me, which I noted without comment. I went to the kitchen for water during the soup course, and she appeared behind me in the corridor, and she pulled the door to the living room mostly closed. She said it the way people say things they have rehearsed for a long time, not whispered, not screamed, simply stated. "He was always mine, Roz. You've known it." She said it as if it were the weather. I stood in that hallway with the glass of water and looked at her face, and I felt something clarify rather than break. The specific, cold clarity of someone who reaches for something in the dark and finds it exactly where they left it. I said, "Thank you for telling me, Cora." I walked back to the table and ate my mother's birthday cake. I drove home alone that night through the Portland rain. The fig tree was a black shape against the fence in the dark, the garden wet and closed. I stood in the rain for a moment in my good coat and thought about 12 years of reading other people's losses and the particular loneliness of losing your sister and your husband on the same night, to each other, in your mother's hallway. Then I went inside, opened the fireproof box, and read the postnuptial amendment from page 1 to page 4, the way I had not read it since the day I reviewed it before Richard signed. I called Fern Whitaker the following morning and told her to expect a filing within 60 days. Richard's initial asset inventory and discovery listed the Selwood house, which he had purchased in his name alone, with his own credit and income, 18 months into the marriage, as a joint marital asset subject to equitable division. He valued it at his own informal estimate, $820,000. His attorney, a Portland family law practitioner named Gerald Howe, submitted this with the kind of confidence that comes from believing you know the landscape. Fern's response arrived within the week. She attached the postnuptial amendment, open to the separately titled property clause, with the relevant language highlighted. She attached the signature page with Richard's signature, the notary seal, and the 2 witnesses. She attached the recording confirmation. She said in the cover letter that the Selwood property was Richard's separate property under the amendment's terms and under Oregon law, and that his initial discovery submission should be revised accordingly. Gerald Howe requested a pause. He called Richard. Richard called me, the first call in 3 weeks. He said, "I don't remember signing that." I said, "You signed it at Fern Whitaker's office on March 14th. There's a notary seal on page 4. There was a pause. He said, "I'd need to review it." I said, "Of course." The review confirmed exactly what the document said. The challenge to the prenuptial protections was not filed. The asset list was revised. The original prenuptial agreement also protected $520,000 in premarital investments I had built over 12 years of working in family law. Total protected from division, approximately $1.9 million in assets Richard's attorney had expected to bring into the calculation. When Gerald Howe reviewed the revised math, what remained in the joint marital estate after the separately titled property and the premarital account were excluded, he called Fern and asked to discuss a settlement framework. The mediation session was held in February in the Pearl District, 12 floors up, the city visible through the rain-blurred glass. Richard and Gerald sat across the table. Fern and I sat opposite. The mediator worked through the asset summary. The $1.4 million house, Richard's separate property. The $520,000 account, my separate property. The joint retirement contributions and shared accounts, divided equitably by agreed formula. When the mediator finished, Richard looked at the table for a moment. He had the look of someone who has done the arithmetic twice and arrived at the same answer both times. He looked up at me once, briefly, something in his face that was not anger and not sorrow, but close to recognition. And then he looked at the Pearl District through the rain-blurred glass. Fern placed the settlement document in front of him. He signed it. He gathered his things and stood, and left the conference room without speaking. I sat for another minute, looking at the city through the window. Then I thanked Fern, put on my coat, and took the elevator down. The fig tree produced the following spring, the first year I had the garden entirely to myself. I ate the figs in July, standing in the garden, with a book I had been meaning to read for 2 years. The crop was not large. It was exactly enough. Cora and Richard moved to a rental in the Alberta Arts District. I did not track them beyond what was unavoidable at family functions. My mother called occasionally, careful with Cora's name, not using it unless I did. I didn't. The cost of the dissolution was precisely accounted for in that way too. One marriage, one sister, and the specific grief of a hallway in October where someone said a true thing in the cruelest possible way. I carry it with the same precision I carry everything else. It does not go away. It becomes part of what you know and what you protect against the next time. There is one more thing I want to tell you, dear listeners. The postnuptial amendment was not drafted to punish Richard. It was drafted in the year of our marriage, when I still hoped it would never be used, when I still believed the marriage was something it turned out not to be. The clause about separately titled property was included because I understood, from professional experience, that marriages change shape, and that the person who does not protect themselves trusts entirely in the shape holding. I trusted the document instead. That is not cynicism. That is the particular clarity of someone who has spent 12 years watching what happens when people don't do the work before they need it. The document you sign before the storm is the one that matters during it. Know what you hold. Do the work before you need it. Now I want to know, what would you have done in that hallway? Would you have confronted your sister in that moment, or done what I did, walked back to the table and eaten the cake? Tell me in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening. Let me fill in the weeks between that hallway and the February settlement, because the work that happened in between is part of the story. After I called Fern that first morning, she had the file within 24 hours. She pulled my prenuptial agreement from her own records. She had drafted the original, and confirmed that the postnuptial amendment was exactly where I had told her it would be. She spent one afternoon reviewing Richard's financial situation as she understood it, and called me that evening with an assessment. The house was the primary exposure. The premarital account was already protected under the original prenuptial. The amendment addressed the house specifically. She believed the case would resolve before trial. I asked her how long. She said 4 to 6 months, possibly less if Richard's attorney was reasonable. Gerald Howe, she said, was competent but practical. He did not fight cases he was going to lose if there was a settlement path. I said I was willing to settle on the joint assets, as long as the protected properties were confirmed excluded. She said she would make that clear in her initial response. I went to the office that week. I sat across from clients going through their own divorces, a woman trying to keep the house, a couple negotiating retirement accounts, a young man whose prenuptial agreement had not been properly executed and who now faced a fight he had not anticipated. I gave each of them my full attention. That is what the work requires, and the work was the steadiest thing I had. It did not change because my own marriage was dissolving. It was the same work it had always been. Richard and I had been apart, in the practical sense, for 3 weeks before he called. He called twice. The first call I did not answer. The second call I answered. He said he was struggling to understand the postnuptial amendment. He said it had not felt significant when he signed it. I said, "It was significant. That's what a legal instrument is." He said, "I trusted you." I said, "You trusted me to explain it clearly, and I did. You chose not to engage your own counsel." He went quiet. He said, "I'm going to ask Gerald to look at the document carefully." I said, "Please do." We did not speak again until the settlement conference. Gerald Howe's review took 4 days. He called Fern on a Friday afternoon and said he needed to discuss the revised asset picture. Fern told me later that Gerald's tone had been the tone of a man who has been given a case he expected to be straightforward and has discovered it is not. He was not hostile about it. He was simply recalibrating. The revised asset list, when it arrived, was correct. The Selwood house was listed as Richard's separate property. My premarital account was listed as my separate property. The joint assets were modest: retirement contributions from the marriage years, shared accounts, and their division. When the protected assets were excluded was a question of arithmetic rather than strategy. The fig tree, dear listeners, had been my grandmother's idea. She had grown one in her garden in Astoria when I was a girl, and I had spent summers picking figs from it in late July, the fruit still warm from the sun, the taste of something that had taken its time. I had bought a 5-gallon container fig from a nursery in Milwaukee and planted it in the Selwood garden in our second spring, in a spot I had prepared with the attention I give to things I intend to keep. It took 3 years to bear anything worth picking. The 4th year, standing alone in the garden with a book in one hand, eating figs in July in the particular quiet of a house that was entirely mine, I thought, yes, this is what patience produces. This exact thing. I do not know what Cora and Richard's life looks like now. I know what neighborhood they moved to. I do not know more than that, and I have not tried to know more. My mother and I have an agreement that is not a formal agreement, an understanding, the way families sometimes arrive at understandings without saying them aloud. She does not tell me things about Cora that I have not asked about, and I do not ask about things I do not want to know. It is a practical arrangement, and it works. I have not decided whether I will speak to Cora again. I have not decided there is anything to say that the settlement documents do not say better. What I will tell you, and this is the thing I most want you to hear, is that the document you prepare in good faith before anything has gone wrong is not a failure of love. It is a recognition that love operates inside the real world, and the real world has mechanisms. Know the mechanisms, use them. Trust that the paperwork done carefully is the shelter that stands when other things do not. Drop your city in the comments and tell me, have you ever done the quiet work, the unglamorous, practical work that later turned out to be the thing that mattered most? I read every comment. Share this story with someone who needs it today. One more thing, dear listeners. In the weeks after the mediation, I did something I had been postponing. I went to my home office, opened the fireproof document box, and took out every marital document it contained: the original prenuptial agreement, the postnuptial amendment, the certified copies of the marriage certificate, and the dissolution decree when it came. I organized them in a clear plastic sleeve in chronological order and placed them at the front of the box. Not because I needed to review them, because I wanted to see them in order, the full sequence of what I had done, from the beginning to the end, laid out clearly. The original prenuptial agreement was 4 pages, simple, clean, drafted when I was 32 and still learning what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. The postnuptial amendment was 4 pages as well, the same length, different purpose, drafted 2 years later when I understood the shape of the marriage better and had made a decision about what I was unwilling to lose. Richard's signature was on both. Mine was on both. 2 witnesses on the amendment, the notary seal at the bottom right. Everything in order. Everything, as Fern had told me from the beginning, exactly right. I closed the box and put it back in its place in my home office and went to the garden. The fig tree was bare at that point. It was February, the garden stripped and resting. But the soil around its roots was clear, and the structure of the tree was visible without the leaves obscuring it. The main trunk, the secondary branches, the scaffold of what would become, come summer, another season of figs. I looked at it for a minute. Then I went inside and made tea. The dissolution was finalized in April. I continued working. I continued seeing clients. I continued tending the garden. And I continue to tell you these stories, dear listeners, because the pattern, the woman who does the quiet work, who holds the document, who waits for the right moment, is a pattern I have watched work, in both professional and personal experience, more reliably than any other approach I have seen. Be patient. Do the paperwork. Know what you hold.